Andrew Jackson, the war hero, the people's president, and the architect of one of the most controversial eras in American history. To his supporters, he was a champion of democracy. To his enemies, he was a tyrant who trampled on the Constitution. His presidency was marked by brutal policies, ruthless decisions, and an iron grip on power. From the forced removal of Native Americans to his war against the banking system, Jackson's legacy is one of triumph, tragedy, and terror. This is the story of Andrew Jackson's reign of terror, a presidency defined by power, destruction, and defiance. Welcome to Old Around the World, where histories are brought to life. Andrew Jackson's journey to the presidency began long before he stepped foot in the White House. Born in 1767 in the backwoods of the Carolinas, Jackson grew up in a world of violence and conflict. His childhood was shaped by the American Revolution, where he was captured by British forces at just 13 years old. The scars he carried from that war would define his ruthless character in the years to come. Jackson rose to national fame during the War of 1812, where he led American forces to a stunning victory in the Battle of New Orleans. The victory made him a national hero, and his reputation as a fearless, no-nonsense leader quickly grew. He capitalized on his newfound fame, building a political base among working-class Americans who saw him as one of their own. By the time Jackson ran for president in 1824, he had become the voice of the common man. However, his first bid for the White House ended in controversy when John Quincy Adams won through a so-called corrupt bargain. Furious and determined, Jackson spent the next 4 years campaigning against the political elite, portraying himself as the defender of democracy. In 1828, Jackson finally triumphed, winning the presidency in a landslide. But his victory marked the beginning of an era unlike any other. Jackson was not just a president, he was a force of nature. His reign would be one of ruthless power, relentless ambition, and terrifying consequences. Upon taking office, Jackson wasted no time reshaping the federal government in his own image. One of his first acts as president was implementing the spoils system, a practice in which he rewarded loyal supporters with government jobs, regardless of their qualifications. To Jackson, loyalty was more important than competence. Under his rule, thousands of government employees were fired, replaced by his political allies. This system of favoritism created one of the most corrupt administrations in American history, where power was concentrated in the hands of Jackson's closest friends and supporters. The idea of a government serving the people was replaced by a government serving Jackson. Critics accused Jackson of turning the White House into a dictatorship, where opposition was silenced and dissenters were purged. Even members of his own cabinet were not safe. When he disagreed with their opinions, he simply forced them out, replacing them with yes-men who would follow his every command. The spoils system set a dangerous precedent for future administrations. Jackson's thirst for absolute control not only reshaped the executive branch, but also cemented the idea that personal loyalty mattered more than the rule of law. Perhaps the darkest chapter of Jackson's presidency was his treatment of Native Americans. Determined to expand U.S. territory, he pushed for the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which forced thousands of Native Americans off their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States. Jackson justified this policy by claiming it was for the protection of Native Americans, but in reality, it was an act of ethnic cleansing. Entire tribes were uprooted and marched hundreds of miles westward to designated reservations in present-day Oklahoma. Thousands perished along the way due to disease, starvation, and exhaustion. The most infamous event of this forced relocation was the Trail of Tears, where over 16,000 Cherokee were forcibly removed from their homeland. Despite a Supreme Court ruling in Worcester versus Georgia that declared the removal unconstitutional, Jackson ignored the decision, famously saying, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." Jackson's Indian removal policy resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands and left an enduring scar on American history. His ruthless actions ensured that the U.S. would continue to expand westward, but at an unimaginable cost. Jackson despised the Second Bank of the United States, believing it was a tool for the rich to manipulate the economy. Declaring war on the institution, he made it his mission to destroy the national bank, calling it a monopoly of the worst kind. The battle reached its peak in 1832 when Congress passed a bill to renew the bank's charter. Jackson vetoed the bill, marking one of the most aggressive uses of presidential power in history. His veto message accused the bank of corruption, elitism, and oppression of the common people. Not satisfied with just blocking the bank's renewal, Jackson ordered the removal of all federal funds from the institution, placing them in smaller state banks, known as pet banks. This reckless financial maneuver led to widespread economic instability, culminating in the Panic of 1837, one of the worst depressions in American history. While Jackson had succeeded in destroying the national bank, his policies left the economy in shambles. His obsession with crushing powerful institutions came at the expense of ordinary Americans, many of whom suffered under the economic collapse he had helped create. If you are still with us, please remember to punch the like button. Andrew Jackson's presidency was marked by conflict, but few moments tested his authority like the Nullification Crisis of 1832. The crisis erupted over high federal tariffs, which South Carolina viewed as an economic burden on the southern states. In response, the state's leaders declared the tariffs null and void, refusing to enforce them. Jackson saw this as a direct challenge to federal power and responded with an iron fist. He issued the proclamation to the people of South Carolina, warning that nullification was treason and that he would use military force if necessary. South Carolina, under the leadership of John C. Calhoun, stood defiant, preparing for potential war. Congress passed the Force Bill, granting Jackson the power to use the military to enforce federal law. At the same time, a compromise was brokered by Henry Clay, reducing the tariffs and easing tensions. War was avoided, but Jackson had made his stance clear. No state would defy the federal government under his watch. The Nullification Crisis set a dangerous precedent for state-federal relations. Though Jackson preserved the Union, his authoritarian methods foreshadowed future conflicts, particularly the Civil War. His message was simple: opposition to federal authority would be met with force. Before Andrew Jackson, the presidency was a relatively restrained office, bound by checks and balances. But Jackson's rule changed that forever. He wielded executive power in ways never before seen, defying Congress, the courts, and even his own advisors to push his agenda. One of Jackson's most significant displays of power was his veto of the Second Bank of the United States. While past presidents had used the veto sparingly, Jackson wielded it like a weapon, striking down laws he disagreed with rather than those he deemed unconstitutional. This transformed the presidency into the dominant branch of government. His defiance of the Supreme Court in Worcester versus Georgia further highlighted his authoritarian style. When the court ruled in favor of the Cherokee Nation, Jackson simply ignored the decision, enforcing Indian removal policies anyway. His willingness to override judicial authority cemented his reputation as a leader who answered to no one. Jackson's presidency set a precedent for unchecked executive power. His willingness to bypass legal and political obstacles laid the foundation for future presidents to expand their authority. In many ways, he was the first to embody what is now called the imperial presidency. Jackson's presidency wasn't just defined by political battles, it was also entangled in scandal. One of the strangest controversies of his administration was the Eaton Affair, a personal and political drama that divided Washington's elite. The scandal revolved around Margaret "Peggy" Eaton, the wife of Jackson's Secretary of War, John Eaton. Washington's high society, led by the wives of Jackson's cabinet members, ostracized Peggy, accusing her of immoral behavior and questioning her virtue. Jackson, seeing echoes of how his late wife Rachel had been vilified during his election, fiercely defended her. The conflict escalated to the point where it paralyzed Jackson's administration. Determined to end the drama, Jackson took drastic action. He dismantled his entire cabinet, forcing multiple resignations and effectively reshaping his government. Only his loyal allies remained. The Eaton Affair, though seemingly personal, revealed Jackson's tendency to rule with absolute loyalty in mind. His unwillingness to tolerate dissent, even over social disputes, demonstrated his iron grip on his administration. While Jackson is often remembered for his war against Native Americans, his involvement in slavery is just as disturbing. A wealthy plantation owner, Jackson personally owned over 150 enslaved people throughout his life, using their forced labor to amass his fortune. As president, Jackson worked to expand slavery rather than limit it. He signed the Indian Removal Act, clearing land in the South for cotton plantations, which relied on enslaved labor. His administration also aggressively pursued the return of runaway slaves, ensuring that enslaved people who escaped to free states were forcibly sent back to their enslavers. Jackson's cruelty extended beyond policy. Historical records reveal that he personally ordered brutal punishments for enslaved people, including whippings and shacklings. He treated slavery as an economic necessity, showing no remorse for the suffering it caused. His legacy as a slaveholder is often overlooked in popular history, but it remains one of the darkest aspects of his reign. Jackson's America was built on the backs of enslaved people, and his policies ensured that slavery would continue to thrive in the decades that followed. Andrew Jackson was not just a political warrior, he was a literal fighter, with a violent past that defined his personality. Throughout his life, he engaged in numerous duels, brawls, and acts of aggression that shaped his ruthless leadership style. One of the most famous incidents occurred in 1806, when Jackson fought a duel against Charles Dickinson, a man who had insulted his wife. Dickinson fired first, striking Jackson in the chest. But Jackson, despite being gravely wounded, remained standing and shot Dickinson dead. The bullet remained lodged in Jackson's body for the rest of his life. His violent reputation extended beyond dueling. As a general, Jackson led brutal military campaigns, massacring Native American tribes during the Creek War and the First Seminole War. His ruthless tactics earned him the nickname Old Hickory, a symbol of his unyielding nature. Even as president, Jackson's temper was legendary. He once attempted to beat down an assassination attempt, attacking his would-be killer with his cane. His aggression was not just political, it was deeply personal. Jackson ruled with both words and fists, ensuring that his enemies feared him, whether on the battlefield or in the halls of government. After serving 2 terms, Jackson left office in 1837, but his influence on America did not fade. His chosen successor, Martin Van Buren, inherited an economy wrecked by Jackson's financial policies, leading to the devastating Panic of 1837. Despite declining health, Jackson remained a political force in his later years, advising Democratic leaders and shaping the party's direction. He spent his final days at the Hermitage, his plantation in Tennessee, where he lived among the enslaved people he never freed. Jackson died in 1845, but his legacy endured. His actions reshaped the presidency, expanded executive power, and left a trail of destruction in their wake. His policies toward Native Americans, his role in the banking crisis, and his violent leadership style had lasting consequences, many of which still impact America today. Some see Jackson as a symbol of the American spirit, tough, unyielding, and determined. Others see him as a dictator who ruled with fear, defying the Constitution whenever it suited him. In truth, he was both. His reign of terror is a cautionary tale of what happens when one man wields too much power, unchecked and unchallenged. Andrew Jackson was a man of contradictions, a war hero who waged war on his own people, a champion of democracy who silenced opposition, a leader who built America's future by destroying countless lives. His reign was marked by power, cruelty, and an unrelenting thirst for control. His presidency was not just a chapter in history, it was a warning. A reminder that even in a democracy, power can be dangerous in the wrong hands. This was Andrew Jackson's reign of terror, a presidency that reshaped America, for better or for worse. If this touched you, please like, subscribe, and share for more of this. Bye, history lover.